towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals? Knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda,
Welcome on behalf of AFD to this International Development Finance Club pavilion. We have gathered and we are still gathering for this event. Please take a seat.
Because we went to the office. We were looking for you there.
Sorry, wrong building. But the recording has started, so please take a seat here or there anyway. We'll make sure that you have the proper seat when the discussion will start. So we have a very nice morning with a diverse panel gathering representative of public development banks within this pavilion with 26 development banks part of this club. Multilateral development banks, thank you for joining the PDBs, and commercial banks and think tanks to exchange essentially on 3 topics, for which we are discussing overnight in this COP. What does it mean for a PDB to respond comprehensively to the expectation of the Paris Agreement given their mandate and therefore the role they have to play toward the countries and with the partner they are working with, and what are the practices at play? What is the place for financed emission accounting, so-called the net zero methodology, in alignment strategy for a PDB? And how can climate finance, so how our funding, direct contribution to the fight against climate change can best contribute to really accelerating the transition? So these questions are not completely new. Of course, we have been discussing them since the Paris Agreement was signed. We've worked a lot on this topic, whoever we are, PDBs, MDBs, and think tanks. AFD, for instance, took quite early in 2017 the commitment to be fully aligned with the Paris Agreement, maybe not knowing immediately fully what it would entail. And we have since then developed our governance methodology, country and sectoral analysis to apply this commitment. The MDBs as well have adopted in 2018 this famous 6 building blocks principles, and they have developed also their own methodologies and strategy to go deeper and more in details into how this is to be applied. For both the IDFC, AFD, and MDB principle, those methodology notably incorporate the support to the elaboration of long-term, low-carbon and resilient strategies in countries, the financing of projects consistent with those country development and climate resilient pathways, and of course the provision of climate finance, as we said. This being said, even though we have worked a lot on how we handle that, we still have questions as we progress in the implementation of those principles, and also as the financial system progresses on on the various approaches which are being developed. Notably, the recent publication of the methodologies and strategies by the MDBs, who bringing a number of new principles and detailed approaches. The importance and the dialogue which is living in between the more private sector-led approaches of financed emission or net zero approaches, as I said. And of course, as we are in this COP, all negotiation related to the Article 2.1.c and the new collective quantified goal for climate. You know that especially on Article 2.1c, we still don't have a point in the agenda, which is a real concern for us, as of course this is the most impactful target of the Paris Agreement, if you take into consideration the role of the financial system. So to discuss all these topics, we have gathered a very nice group of panelists. To frame the discussion, we will start with 2 short presentations from Bella Tunkongini, Director of CPI USA. She will start by presenting an overview of PDB practices on alignment. As you know, CPI has been following, analyzing, and helping the reporting of climate actions of financial actors for many years now. The deepest data gathered by any think tank on the topic. And Bella and her team are also working together with I4CE on this topic, and I've been working with AFD and IDFC for years now on this aspect. We also have Alexis Bonnel, a senior counselor at the French Development Agency, which will give an overview of IDFC's recent discussion and thinking on these aspects, and notably on the question of the SEQG and Article 2.1c and how they should articulate. We will then have the panel discussion around the 3 questions. It will be moderated by Claire Echalier from I4CE, who is a Paris-based think tank dedicated to analysis of policies and financing means of climate action. I'll be briefer to present all the panelists, but we are very grateful to have the Secretary General, Mr. Edgardo Alvarez of ALIDE, Dimitri Gvindadze, Director Climate Strategy and Regional Delivery at EBRD, Peter Hilligus, Head of the Competence Center Climate and Energy at KfW, Karel Cronenberg, Senior Technical Advisor at the Council of Europe Development Bank, Mariam Kil, Director Green Transition at Crédit Agricole Maroc, and my colleague Hervé Breton, Senior Climate Advisor at AFD. Bella, I leave you the floor.
Good morning, everybody. So I thought I would take a step back and just remind us where we've been on this. This is such a big topic, and we've had actually over many years, a lot of really good debates about it. This is nothing new to anybody in this room, and I'm sure anybody watching online. So I just thought I would just remind us where we started, which was back in 2019 with I4CE. We had a paper on implementing alignment within the IDFC. And we talked about the different levels of alignment, we called it back then. So that really trying to show this picture of public finance institutions, public development banks really having an important role with countries in helping them on their Paris pathways in terms of policy advice and dialogue, and really building relationships with them and helping support them with their long-term strategies. Then within the public development bank institutions, we had a strategic level around setting institution-wide objectives, which was, at that time really 100% alignment. And AFD had just then set their 100% alignment goal. What would the incentive structures, the risk management frameworks look like? And then the operational level, which was around specifically as you're making investment decisions, what are the criteria you use? How do you prepare aligned projects? How do you bring the private sector in? And to some extent, we are in a way kind of still talking around this framework because, you have the framework, but actually when you get down to the details, there's a lot of questions that emerge. And a lot of, even though we may not want there to be trade-offs, sometimes there are. And I think that that this project now that we've been undertaking with I4CE and AFD again is like it's one level deeper on a lot of these topics, and what are, really trying to understand what are the approaches that public development banks have actually been using as they've been trying to figure out how to achieve this over the last 4 years or 5 years in some cases. And there's still open questions, right? And so what I'm going to talk about is just, well, one, I think here, what we have been trying to do, we've been kind of zooming in on decarbonization. It's not because the rest of it isn't important, it's just because you have to have some focus, right? And so the research questions we started with are around, what role are public development banks playing in decarbonization? What are the different approaches? both, looking at the private financial institutions and the public financial institutions that are being used to actually support decarbonization of investments, and it's a very different term when you think about it for private investments and public investments. And then what's the best approach for public development banks, and how can that differ too by the sizes of the public development banks, where they're operating, where they're based, what their mandate is. And it's, I think we've seen a lot of commonalities and some areas of divergence. And so I think that's what, I'm going to just briefly summarize right now. I don't want to, I think there's a lot to discuss today, so I just want to kind of very briefly summarize some of those approaches. So we've cataloged a bunch of these approaches. I kind of looked at who is implementing what. We've done a few case studies on these types of approaches. And really, again, we're talking about the operational side of things. So when we actually get down to it, what are the public development banks doing? And, we looked also at the private financial institutional alliances. What are the kinds of approaches and methodologies they're using? A lot are similar, but then, of course, the big question is around kind of the portfolio level and what that looks like in terms of net zero and Paris alignment versus more of the project level and the country level approaches. But, I think there are some common approaches across all of them. So just in terms of what they are, we've, of course, the MDB building blocks and the joint methodologies around them are quite important and quite detailed. We have a case study on EBRD, but I won't go into that because EBRD is here, so they can tell us themselves what they're doing. We have, we do have some PDBs that are undertaking portfolio emissions tracking, both kind of national PDBs as well as private sector-oriented PDBs. A few have set portfolio emissions targets, so this is one of the key areas that there's a lot of discussion about. There's a lot, in particular in the private sector, what we're seeing now is much more attention on sectoral pathways and sectoral emissions intensity targets and sectoral targets in general. And I think there's a lot of discussion around how, at the sector level and the country level, how you bring those together and really think about what are the local contexts and what does that mean. I think the sector level is really where a lot of the details actually really come out and really matter because it's very local and easier to, not easier, definitely not easy, but just one can wrap one's head around it at the sector level. Transition planning and counterparty engagement and some of the practices around that. In the private financial sector, there's been a lot of discussion around transition plans. GFAN's had a paper this year. There's been a lot of development in that space. And then climate finance targets, which both in the private and the public sector are maybe the most advanced in a lot of ways. So, and I think just to say, in both the public and private sectors, many have adopted combinations of approaches. I think there's no one clear, this is how you do it. This is like the one benchmark that you need to measure, to understand, to assess, but actually like this combination and this, the nuanced approach, the local context have been all quite important for these discussions. And that nuance is, it's quite challenging when you are thinking at the institutional level to actually translate between those nuanced approaches and the operations up to, what the institution overall is doing. And I think there's a lot of challenge in that space. So just to say, finally, PDBs are, I think, largely aligned in their approaches. I find when I talk about alignment, it's hard to not use the word aligned in other ways. This is not like Paris aligned, they're just aligned with each other. But there's a lot of commonalities around, thinking about the country level, thinking about sector level approaches, There's a lot, and that again is both at the private and the public financial institutional level. The transition planning comes out quite a lot. And then when PDBs, and I started out saying we're focused on decarbonization, but every time we have the discussion, the PDBs are like, yeah, but what about all the other things that need to happen while we are working towards decarbonization, the adaptation and resilience, the social side of things. There's not, please don't leave that out. And then I think there's been some debate on more on like the details of the Paris Agreement and what 2.A, 2.1B, 2.1C actually mean vis-a-vis each other, and how the private financial institutional focus on net zero targets and portfolio emissions tracking, like where there are, is that always applicable in the public space? And I think that's the big question that keeps coming up in these discussions, because we see some PDBs that have set net zero targets, but it doesn't seem to make sense for all of them for a lot of reasons, and really mostly because of country development pathways and the need to be very nuanced, especially when we're working in developing economies. And so I think this is something as we are kind of getting towards the end of this project, really trying to figure out how we can best approach that discussion. And so I'm looking forward to this discussion. Hopefully that'll help us kind of isolate some of those big questions and help us really refine the way we're thinking about these. So that's all I wanted to say about this. I think I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I will pass it straight to you. Okay, sorry.
Thank you very much, Bella. No, just to say, indeed, you show very well the number of methodologies that have been used, and at the same time that the PDBs tend to share the same view and question, and most probably because the public development banks feel that their mandate with regard to the Paris Agreement is different from the private sector, and that we are called to support the countries and the partners within these countries to implement the pathways of their countries as a party to the Paris Agreement. And so most probably this creates the difference in tools and position today in between public and private sector banks, which doesn't mean that we cannot learn from each other's practices, but that it differentiates the way the tools can be used and efficient. And I will therefore leave the floor also to Alexis to give us more views about the IDFC. In addition to this part, which is really about methodology, the IDFC views and strategy on the NCQG and 2.1C, please, and transition finance.
Well, thank you very much, Mathilde, and good morning, everyone. And hi to all the viewers online or in replay. I will indeed speak today to contribute to setting the scene here for the discussion that will take place in a few minutes. And wearing this time the hat of a member of the IDFC, it so happens that the club has engaged into a reflection on how it could contribute to the ongoing discussions here at COP28 and next COP on the future climate finance regimes post-2025. And so my intention in a couple of minutes is to present you a little bit the thinking of the current thinking of the club on those issues, and quickly present a paper that is released these days at COP28 which summarizes the thinking of the club on those topics. And there are many connections with what Bella has just presented, and also several questions that are being raised. So I will get to that in a second. But first of all, just a quick reminder for those of you who might not be fully familiar with the discussions at the negotiations on climate finance. There are several streams that are being today the subject of discussions. One of them is the so-called NCQG discussion on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, and this comes from the Paris Agreement, Article 9, and the accompanying decision of COP21 back in 2015 that is asking the negotiators to come up with a new goal that will replace the 100 billion goal that currently exists. This needs to be settled by the next COP. So in less than 1 year, we need to land on those issues. And of course, that's not an easy discussion, obviously. And then there's another discussion that was set up last year at COP27, which is the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogue, which is a dialogue reflecting on the implementation of Article 21C of the Paris Agreement about making all financial flows consistent with low carbon and resilient development pathways. And also this dialogue is about thinking the complementarities between the objective of Article 21C and the setting up of the new collective quantified goal. And parties, but also non-parties, including financial institutions, are invited to contribute to this dialogue. So this is basically what motivated IDFC to come up with a reflection and share some views on those issues. And why is IDFC focusing on this topic, or why have we spent some time reflecting on that and putting together a common position? Well, there are a few elements in there. Well, first of all, if you look at what is being discussed here in the negotiations and the importance of what is being discussed, probably what will come out of that is a new set of elements that will guide the post-2025 climate finance architecture. And it will have plenty of implications on the, potentially at least, on the strategies and operations of many development finance institutions and public development banks, but even beyond that, a lot of financial stakeholders, including maybe even regulators, could be incentivized or could have some connection with or could have activities related to decisions that will be taken under these discussions. And of course, IDFC has probably some level of leverage here, or at least there is a possibility to share some views and of being heard, because IDFC is the major provider of public climate finance worldwide, with more than 280 billion of climate finance provided last year, for instance. And since its creation, it's been the raison d'être of IDFC. It's DNA to work and promote more ambition relating to climate action and the financing of climate action. And this is why basically the club was created in the first place back in 2011. And of course, there are many other streams that the club is developing in other SDG related areas, but on climate finance, it's always been there, one of the major elements of intervention of IDFC. So all of this generated interest within the club to come up with a common contribution or a common paper, which is now available on the website of the IDFC for those who want to have further reference. So the overall thrust of the paper is to inform the UNFCCC climate finance dialogues about what is the state of play of integration of climate considerations within public development banks, and in particular IDFC members, who are major practitioners of and implementers of climate finance. And it's also about calling for decisions that provide incentives and that are systemic and comprehensive in connection with the climate finance agenda. And of course, IDFC is also signaling through this paper its availability to further contribute, and I will come back to that in a second. If we enter a little more into the content of this contribution, well, first of all, what IDFC has been thinking is that it could make sense to take a step back and look at more than 10 years of practice in integrating climate in the activities of the club members, and see what this journey looks like. Where do we stand, and what could be the next step to continue raise ambition? And if you look at this journey, basically it started back in 2011 when the club was created with a first effort relating to tracking and further increasing climate finance volumes. It was very much about quantity at that time. And this is when also along with the multilateral development banks, we ended up setting up common principles for the tracking of climate mitigation and climate adaptation finance. All of that was relating to volumetric and quantitative consideration. That was a first step. But then as things evolved, we realized that it's not only about providing projects and actions with climate co-benefits and measuring the volumes attached to that. It's also about making sure that the rest of the portfolio is consistent and integrates climate considerations. And this is where we and many IDFC members engage with mainstreaming climate in all of what they do at the strategic and operational level. And this is also when, in connection with the creation of the mainstreaming climate action initiative in 2015, many IDFC members joined this initiative, and at this COP earlier, the IDFC actually joined as a club the climate mainstreaming initiative, and Claire, who is here from I4C, is working at the secretariat and dealing with the secretariat of this initiative, so she will probably speak more about it. And so it was about integrating in all of what we do as an institution climate considerations. And then further down the road, a few years ago, always looking at increasing ambition, we thought, well, maybe there's even more that we can do. And this is where the climate alignment considerations came up. And it's this idea that as public development banks, it's obviously necessary and good to provide finance that generates climate co-benefits. It's absolutely necessary to make sure that our whole portfolio is consistent with climate action, but beyond that, as public development banks, we probably also have higher ambitions to meet, and these relate to the overall reorientation of finance and financial flows. And this is the thrust of a lot of the alignment approaches that have been implemented by different public development banks and IDFC members since. So this journey, basically, if we want to summarize it, is about doing good things, yes, and I have to speed up, which we started with by working on climate finance volumes, to doing things right, making sure that all of what we do is climate consistent, to doing the right things, which is in connection with the mandates of a public development bank, looking at the overall need to reorient finance. And basically what came out of that is this journey, and that's where we stand, is that we have three guiding standpoints. Of course, Article 2.1c and making the worldwide financial capital flows compatible with climate is a guiding element. Another guiding element is that public development banks have a unique role here to contribute to this overarching agenda. And the third element is that we have plenty of potential as public development banks to do more. And if we just to conclude here, if we look at in more detail about the proposals of IDFC to the climate finance dialogues under the UNFCCC, well, they are organized in two major chapters, I would say. First of all is a proposal to the negotiators to consider a comprehensive approach. One that is about, of course, increasing volumes of climate finance. This is absolutely needed, but it's not only that. It's also working towards the orientation of all financial capital and flows, and also make sure that whatever finance is being mobilized, that we try to ensure that it has as much transformational impact as possible. And to do that, you need a lot of collaboration, of course. So basically, and in other words, it's about putting the billions which are necessary to deal with the climate emergency, while at the same time shifting the trillions of the entire financial system, and seek simultaneously to be as transformational as possible when you are financing action in terms of climate impacts. And if you have that comprehensive approach, then maybe one good outcome of the negotiations could be a regime that provides the corresponding incentives. And a lot of development banks and economic actors respond to incentives, we as IDFC members as well. And we have an opportunity here through the negotiations to put together a few incentives that could tremendously help mobilize the full potential of our institutions into contributing to the ultimate objective of the Paris Agreement, including Article 21C. And that's, among others, the integration of transformational potential criteria in the definition of future climate finance. And there are several examples of what transformational finance could be, and these include, of course, all the support to policy and regulations at country level. Support to capacity building is absolutely key. Support to action that combines not only climate but also biodiversity, just transition objectives, and that has a more systemic scope vis-à-vis the SDGs. This could also be considered potentially as something transformational. And attached to that, of course, there's a need to develop the corresponding accountability frameworks. And basically, we do have some frameworks today regarding traditional climate finance. These are the common principles, including the updated ones recently by the MDBs and the IDFC. We have emerging accountability frameworks on what is climate-aligned finance, climate that is not harming, finance that is not harming the climate objectives, and this is still quite a lot of think tank territory, I would say. We only have bits and pieces of ideas relating to transformational finance, and more work is needed here. And IDFC is ready to contribute to the development of such frameworks and test them also in the diversity of the situations of the different institutions. And all of that, of course, having in mind the importance of doing that with the country ownership imperative in mind and aligned with the country priorities and objectives. So as next steps, IDFC proposes to step up in terms of participating to the UNFCCC dialogues on these topics, and further share these reflections and identify areas where, as a club, contributions could be useful. And the climate working group of the IDFC in particular could continue reflections notably related to the characterization of the different types of the future climate finance that could be set up, not only dealing with co-benefits, as I said, or not only dealing with the fact that it has to be aligned in terms of ensuring that there's no harm in whatever you do to the climate objectives, but most and foremost probably work more on what does it mean to provide finance that has transformational potential in terms of climate impacts. And that, I think, would be, if integrated at some point in the negotiations, something very useful. And by the way, the current texts in the negotiations around the NCQG mentions the fact that this new objective should be multi-dimensional. That's what it says today as it's being negotiated. We don't know yet exactly what multidimensional would mean, but maybe one way of interpreting this is to integrate transformational criteria as one of the dimensions of the future climate regime. So I'll stop there. Sorry for being a bit long, but that's the current thinking of the IDFC on those issues, and happy to continue the discussions here.
Thank you very much, Alexi. Good morning to you all. Thank you, Mathilde, for setting the scene, Alexi and Bella for providing some insights on the context and some forward-looking considerations as well for us to reflect on during the second part of the discussion today. So my name is Claire Richali. I think most of you know me, but for those who don't, I'm head of the Mainstreaming Climate in Financial Institutions Initiative and also team lead at the Institute for Climate Economics, so working with Bella on the research project that she just presented. We have, I think now, a little less than 1 hour to cover a lot of different things. And we have we have 6 very esteemed panelists, practitioners from public development banks, but also commercial banks. And we're going to take this hour to share some practice and experience on how public development banks can best respond to Paris Agreement expectations and try to reflect a little bit on some of the avenues of action. So Alexi just mentioned a couple, but in a context for accelerating the country transitions. So we've structured the conversation around 3 different questions, which you'll each be offered the opportunity to reflect on. And we'll try to stay concise if possible. I'm sorry, I really have to do that because I know you all have separate engagements afterwards as well. So we'll try to stick to under 5 minutes, if possible, less for each one of the questions. So the first question the first question you were all asked to reflect on relates to the explicit and implicit expectations of the Paris Agreement for public development banks. So what does it mean for a public development bank to respond comprehensively to these expectations, and what are the questions at play? So I'm going to start with the public development banks themselves, and I'm going to start with Mr. Dimitri Gvindadze from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development Bank, your Director of Climate Strategy and Regional Delivery. If you could please reflect a little bit on that first question for us, please.
Do you want me to go to the...
probably best if you sit down. Oh, if you prefer to stand, you can. It's just that otherwise it's probably going to take some time. If you prefer to... Yeah, that's what I think.
All right. Good morning. Thinking strategically about what the Paris Agreement is, right? Yes, now it works. So there are 6 building blocks, and very often people, speak about mitigation and adaptation only, but they forget about the climate finance, about the policy dialogue, reporting, and own emissions, So thinking strategically is basically about thinking about all 6 building blocks and what can be done. If you look at the scope, that there are several. There are many things that are being discussed, But I think some of the key issues, at the core of the UNFCCC discussions, which will end up in the communique, and the final declaration that will be the issue of how to bridge the global climate investment gap, how to make sure that multilateral development banks, the national development banks, and others, that they help to scale up through own finance and also through the mobilization and the discussion about the new quantified goal, which is starting now, is gaining pace. As you know, it would have to reach the conclusion at the next scope. So this is basically the context, how to scale up the climate finance. Now, as far as the EBRD is concerned, we're a regional development bank, as you know. If you look at our operating model, it's a bit different from other MDBs because 3/4 of what we do is in the private sector. Starting from the January of this year, we're fully Paris aligned, and 50% of our operations for the last couple of years is basically green. Now, there is BB1, which is about the mitigation, BB2 about adaptation. The approaches there are different, because when it comes to mitigation, it's easier to source the commercially viable projects, including the project finance transactions, And if you look at the solar and wind technologies, for example, they have become commercially viable. You know, I mean, in terms of the cost, they can compete and even out-compete. You know, in many cases, you know, the older sources of energy, you know, the fossil fuels. So we're trying to roll it out as much as possible, and we're doing it on the commercial basis. You know, we engage with the big sponsors in the region. We also finance the PVs and distributed solar, you know, through the banking sector. When it comes to the adaptation, I mean, we depend on the grant financing, and that's where the role of the donor partnerships is exceptionally important, you know, because it's very difficult to source commercially viable adaptation projects, and by nature, those are the projects which can be best funded, you know, the sovereign, sub-sovereign, municipal basis. Now, building block 3, you know, I mean, the finance. What can I, again, you know, getting back to this issue of how to bridge the global climate investment gap. We provide a lot of climate finance from our sources, like 6 billion roughly, you know, and we mobilize 1.5 times, you know, the climate finance that we provide. So we have a very high climate mobilization ratio, not least because, as I said, you know, 3/4 of what we do is in the private sector. We are trying to mobilize as much money as possible through the so-called integrated approach. And let me explain what this is. Last year at the COP27, we launched the so-called Nuafe energy pillar in Egypt, which is the green growth transition, you know, the accelerated exit from the fossil fuels, you know, and the accelerated development of the renewables in Egypt. So basically, Nuafe, which we support together with the government of Egypt leads the implementation, but we support it. You know, it basically means that we're decommissioning 5 gigawatts of the fossil fuel capacity. We're investing into the reskilling of workers, into the grid upgrades, into the just transition measures, and that helps to crowd in the commercial lending and investment, you know, to develop 10 gigawatts of the new solar and wind capacity. So look at the multiplier, you know, I mean, the roughly $500 million provided for the just transition, for the grid upgrades on the grant base and highly concessional base allows to crowd in roughly $10 billion of the commercial investment into the mitigation infrastructure. This is 1 to 15, 1 to 20 multiplier, you know, and these are the projects and these are the schemes and approaches that we're trying to multiply across our countries of operation. Yesterday, we presented a similar approach in North Macedonia, the accelerated coal transition scheme, you know, which helps to basically exit the coal entirely, you know, and to crowd in 1.7 gigawatts of the new renewables. We're discussing similar models related to the industrial decarbonization, which is based on our low carbon pathways, you know, and other upstream policy dialogue measures that we implement. So that's the finance. Fourth pillar.
Yeah, sorry, I'm afraid we're a bit tight with the time's already up. So if you could just summarize quickly the second,
sure.
the last.
Now there is this fourth pillar, which is about the policy dialogue, long-term strategies, low carbon pathways. We're launching the long-term strategies program, which will enable the MDBs to do more, you know, on the upstream side, and we also have the reporting and the reduction of own emissions, you know, and I can tell you more about that if you wish, you know, but I understand that there is no time for that.
Thank you. What I'll probably do maybe, and someone who might be able to add to that or complete, is I'll probably pass it over to your fellow MDB panelist, so that maybe, you can add to what's just been said by Dimitri. Karel Cronenberg, yes, you're from the Council of Europe Bank, Senior Technical Advisor, if you'd like to also reflect maybe on what you're doing. So,
yeah, sorry, we have a bit of a wire, but it works. It's fine. Yes, I'm from the Council of Europe Development Bank, based in Paris. We are a social development bank, and my answers are a bit because of that perspective, but I think it's an interesting perspective. First of all, let me focus on the most important thing. The most important thing is basically the activities that you do in your lending operations. In November, we fully approved our Paris alignment approach for our lending operations. And basically, this approach is fully based upon the MDB methodology, was just also being mentioned. And there are basically two levels. I think that's very important. It was also from the presentation from Alexis. First of all, you have the things that are very explicit. Of course, we don't want to do any significant harm to mitigation objectives. We follow very much the EU context. We follow very much also, in that respect, the EU NDC. But we also apply, I would say sector-specific emission factors as a proxy to determine what is Paris aligned or not. And secondly, all our projects need to be climate resilient. So that is basically the other element. But that are the explicit elements. And there are a number of, I would say, less explicit elements. And they're not being discussed that much. But first of all, it's very important. It's not only the project that you do, it's very much also what do you do at the level of your counterpart? How do you impact your counterpart? And basically, how do you help your counterpart or impose to your counterpart to take on climate strategies themselves? And I think that's where you can really make the change. So that is one thing. The other thing that is very, I would say, less explicit, but very important for a social bank is that if you do a climate change project, do you not, I would say, impact your social outcomes in a negative way? For instance, you can subsidize vehicles, but if only, I would say, high-income people have access to these electric vehicles, then you're basically, I would say, imposing a negative outcome. The same you can see also in a positive way. Or another negative way, we finance a lot in hospitals, but if you don't make the hospital significantly resilient also for heat waves, then basically your social outcomes are negatively impacted. But that works also the other way around, and let me complete with that then. And that is that it is super important to be aware that the social outcomes are also strengthening your climate projects. We will discuss about just transition, and we will have another panel later today on that topic. But for instance, you can work on social housing, but just make those social housing, I would say, sufficiently energy efficient. So you basically are at the same time tackling energy poverty, but at the same time also tackling climate change. And those I would say, elements strengthening each other are very much part of the, I would say, the Paris alignment approach as well. So basically the explicit level about basically do no significant harm, resilient, and the implicit level very much about well, the other elements that I just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. Without any further ado, I'm going to pass it over to the bilateral public development banks that are with us today. So should we probably start with Hervé, since you're sitting next to Carol. Hervé Breton, you're from the French Development Agency, the Facility 2050 coordinator. If you could reflect a little bit on what's just been said and what you as IDFC member are doing.
Yes, thank you, Claire. So I'll be very brief. What I'll do, I think, is just talk a bit about the journey that AFD took to end up with its current response to the Paris alignment, to the Paris Agreement, sorry, if you will. So basically, its current response was drawn up back in 2017 when AFD established its climate strategy. And it stems basically from a few very basic facts that echo what Alexis was describing as an introduction. First of all, until 2017, basically AFD climate action was very much was ambitious, but very much focused on providing climate finance, a sizable portion of its portfolio dedicated to climate finance, and to looking at the GHG impacts, in fact, of its finance projects. Of course, it was a bit more elaborated than that, but two major pillars. And then came the Paris Agreement, and it became very, very clear that we just couldn't be content with just as a PDB with basically providing non-climate finance alongside climate finance, or with just looking at the direct impacts of our projects. And so what became clear is that, of course, we needed to make sure that, according to what 21C was obviously telling us, we needed to make sure that all our financing were consistent with country transitions, basically. But beyond this, what was also clear is that what we needed to do was actually contribute to basically the redirection of finance flows beyond ours. We needed to strengthen the foundations for enabling environments to that redirection of funds. And so basically, these considerations actually led to the 3 pillars of the climate strategy, which is actually a response to the Paris Agreement from our side, which are this strategic commitment to ensure that all our financing are consistent with low carbon and resilient development. A strong pillar that remains the provision of climate finance, yes, but also a 3rd pillar that that exists, that was there since 2017, of trying to contribute to that fundamental redirection of flows beyond our own, basically. And this has been the interesting thing about AFD, I won't dwell into this, is that this has been operationalized within the assessment cycle, if you prefer, of our projects. So that's on the operational side, but it's been also helped by a major investment, intellectual investments, I should say, in terms of knowing about what transition means at country level for us. So a bit like the PDBs are doing when it comes to CCDRs. The World Bank Group is not represented here, but basically it's a bit of the same idea. And also supporting directly countries in the elaboration of those long-term strategies, which is, if you prefer, a support to the implementation of what we'd like to do. We need that knowledge, and we need to establish and work with the countries on that knowledge of transition. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Hervé. Thank you for providing some insight on the journey and how you continue on continuous ambition there. I'll pass it over to Peter.
I have the mic now, but I can also give it back to you if you want to. So.
IDFC member, maybe you can also share with us some of what you're doing.
I just recounted, so it should be 3-minute statements, I guess, if we stick to the time frame. I want to add another perspective, since I think the story between AFD and KfW is pretty comparable in many respects. So one thing that I recognize when it comes to the role of public development banks and Paris is, I believe the Paris Agreement has made us and our work much more political as compared to the previous regime, where we could really act just on a project basis and try to contribute somehow meaningfully to climate benefits and do climate finance account for it. Now with the Paris Agreement, I feel with this approach that's taken with the self-selected targets and the NDCs of our partner countries, and with the strategies and political dimensions that come in from our government as our owners and money givers, we are much more drawn into the negotiating space, where we all know there are so many conflicts and different objectives, and there's heckling and struggling and trying to get your points through, and we are in the middle of it. Because we as the development bank, we are entrusted with implementing all these different policies and strategies and targets and programs. And so we have to build our systems in order to reflect that. And that's a big challenge, because our government of Germany, they are saying, okay, we have to be 1.5 compatible, it has to be, I don't know, totally zero carbon, and everything has to be resilient. And the partners say, no, well, let's wait. We are not so much interested in the carbon emissions of our hospital that we are building, we are interested in the hospital. And so our systems have to reflect that and somehow find the balance. And that I find quite challenging. And then if I then transport that onto our organization, where we have 1,000 people working on it, you have to carry them all along. With climate finance, and Alexis, I liked your 3-step thing about climate finance, mainstreaming, and what was the last one? Alignment, right. Because the first one, the climate finance, everyone has accepted over the years. I mean, that's really deeply ingrained. The mainstreaming thing we are just working on.
Yeah, so we've established a system in KfW Development Bank for this. Yeah, with lots of measures and targets and criteria. And the alignment one is the next level. Yeah, and this is kind of a continuum. Yeah, so it's not distinct that you do one thing, you finish it, and you start the other one. Yeah, but it happens at the same time. So it's kind of an institutional learning process that is happening and kind of accelerating. I feel it's accelerating with everyone talking about, okay, 2030 we have to achieve this and this and this. Everyone feels the pressure that we have to be faster. Yeah. So I guess that's the same, and that it's important for me that development banks work together in this same direction. I feel it's happening. So 3 minutes 15.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter, for reflecting and insisting a little bit more even on the mandate that PDBs have, how it's specific, and some of the associated challenges there. I think before we hand it over to the commercial bank that's with us today, I'll probably pass it over to Edgardo Alvarez, your Secretary General of the Latin American Association of Development Financing Institutions. So you all have a bit of a different view, I guess, as the Association of National Development Banks. So you'll probably provide some additional insight.
Hello, thank you. No, thank you for the invitations, and I try to give you what we're doing in Latin America. First of all, for a development bank that must fully respond to the specific expectation of the Paris Agreement, I agree with what you said. We must take a strategic and holistic approach. Because if not, if we, the banks, we don't do this, we don't have our operations aligned, the investments and the policies. So from the top to the bottom. So this is the first of all, and I really liked your chart, and I'd like to share with us. As we know, one swallow doesn't make a summer. So we need a flock of swallows to make the summer we also all want. And that means for all our banks to align its activities with the agreement long-term goals, to measure the greenhouse gases in all the activities. If you don't measure what we know, what is not known, it doesn't exist. So you must take it out and put in all the projects and all the activities you have in order to have an idea, in order that everybody knows what we're doing. We must, as we talk about the counterparties, associate actively with the stakeholders, including governments, enterprise, communities, and civil society. So we must work together with this. If we don't work together, it doesn't work. Together we can do more. And finally, in regard to the practices we play, in ALIDE, we are working together with the IDB. Last year, in last COP, we launched the working group on alignment to the Paris Agreement for the public banking system. So we're working with all our banks. We have all offered them the possibility to incorporate to this, to incorporate the strategies and operations, and of course, to design a roadmap. If you don't have a roadmap, you are just talking and having very good ideas, but you must put them on paper, put them on the strategies, and because if you don't do this, you cannot have a good future. It reminds me, when I was in my former life, I was a consultant for the IDB, and I used to work also for the COFIDE and for a commercial bank. And I also asked to my clients to tell me, how are you committed with this, with the microfinance or what you are trying to do? Show me your strategic plan, and I want to see if in your strategic plan you have how it goes to the operational plans and how it goes to everyone. Because the last part of the bottom of the company, they don't know what they think the people on the top are thinking. So you must go this from the top to the bottom for everything. That's what we're doing in ALIDE with the help of IDB. And I think it's time to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure it's initiating a lot of thought and food for thought for lots of people who want to come up to you afterwards to understand more what you're doing. We're lucky enough to have a commercial bank who's also interested in the discussion, an ambitious commercial bank, Crédit Agricole Maroc Group, who Mariem Tril. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You're director of Green Transition there, and we'd like to hear a little bit of your views as a commercial bank, maybe on what public development banks can do, and how you probably share some similar challenges as well to them.
Actually, you will be disappointed because we're a public development bank too.
Oh, right,
We're
okay.
a public development bank specialized in agriculture.
Okay,
but
sorry.
we're not doing only agriculture. This is why sometimes we're referred to as commercial bank. But
okay.
Yeah, our main shareholder is the government.
All right, thank you
and
for
our mandate
adding to
is
that.
to finance agriculture, our main mandate. So as such, we're committed to finance the political and the strategy of the government, and mainly in agriculture. So we have a low carbon development strategy, and our main role is to support this strategy in the agricultural sector. So for us, I would say that it's important to make sure that we leave no one behind. So when we integrate the climate part, we have to make sure that we're still financing all the farmers, especially that in Morocco and in Africa, most of the countries in Africa, smallholder farmers are the major part of our clients. So we have to make sure that while we're integrating all those criteria, climate criteria, we have to still provide financing for our farmers so that they can make the appropriate investments to adjust. It happens that in agriculture, mitigation and adaptation most of the time are common measures, so that's a good thing. While we're financing mitigation measures, we're also financing adaptation, be it in agroforestry, in conservation agriculture, etc. So that's something that we're committed to. But at the same time, our objective is to go beyond that. We believe that as a public development bank working in agriculture, our role is to really pass on the conversation between the government, the strategy, and the field. Because we are in contact with the fields, we know what kind of practices are going on the field, we know what are the needs, what might be the constraints from the field, and then we have to inform our shareholders to make sure that in this journey toward the Paris alignment, everybody has the same information, and everybody is on board. So in Morocco, we are also leading actually the climate discussion, because we have elaborated a taxonomy, grant taxonomy, to make sure that our financing actually to identify what is the green part of our portfolio, to make sure that we can have proper objectives in order to redirect our flows, financial flows, towards a greener and climate pathways.
Thank you very much, Mariem, and thank you for the national insight that you have and you just provided. Now, the second question is more of a zoom on decarbonization, and we wanted for you maybe to have the opportunity to share your views on the place for financed emissions accounting in an alignment strategy for public development banks. So if you could all maybe reflect on that, or the ones that would like to reflect on that, please do so. I'm going to take it in the same order, if that's okay. And yes, and again, if you could keep it short so that we can try to finish close to time, that would be excellent. Thank you. So I'll pass it over maybe to you, Dimitri, first.
Well, thank you very much. Very briefly, I mean, there are two dimensions to this question. One is the carbon footprint of our organization. Another is the carbon footprint of the countries of operation where we operate. And we believe that the latter is really key. And that's where we basically try to trigger the systemic impact. I started by saying I mean, responding to the previous question, that we do a lot of upstream work, upstream policy dialogue. You know, we're increasingly engaged into developing the low carbon pathways in all sectors, fertilizers, aluminium, cement, steel, you know, and on that basis, we try to help the industries to decarbonize. You know, we're working on the just energy transition roadmaps, you know, and the accelerated coal transition, you know. So we're basically trying to take a holistic approach, you know, to make sure that the countries where we operate, they decarbonize, you know, and sometimes it's very difficult politically also, you know, because the coal exit is always politically turbocharged, you know, that there is inertia, you know, that there are people who are involved. You need to reskill those people. You need to restructure the economy, and it entails big political commitments and a lot of courage on the side of the governments which implement that, you know, especially when the energy security and the system stability issues are involved, you know. So that's where the bulk of the focus is for us for the EBRD. But we're also trying to reduce our carbon footprint, you know, through all sorts of measures, and we are increasingly trying to basically offset the delta, the difference.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Since we're not talking about approaches specifically, maybe I can just take it in turn, if that's okay for you, Caro, then, yeah, sorry.
Sorry,
so
Caro.
I can go second in that case.
I'm just sitting next to him, so it's... Yes, it's good. Yeah, it's good to be at the chain, end of the food chain, or the comments chain. Yeah, so what is KfW doing? Actually, we're in the middle of a big discussion about what we should do about carbon accounting. We have the banking group, which is going towards CSRD compatible carbon accounting, and they are trying to find out what is compatible and what they really have to do, and what is more kind of not really voluntary, but where you have your room to design your own approaches. And so, of course, PCAF is something that is on the table, and so accounting according to PCAF standards might be the solution for the group, which is a trouble for us because we, as a development bank, we are looking at, we always say it's an impact-driven carbon estimation. We don't even call it accounting because we're not really accounting in the terms of putting it on the balance sheet and then depreciating it according to reflows and stuff. We're simply saying, okay, we finance this. This has an impact, and we take the responsibility for this impact, even if it's a carbon footprint. And so that's how we work in the development bank. We've been working like this for many, many years. We are refining our approaches, technical tools, assessment, algorithms, getting better data, improving, so that it's more accurate. You just said something about what you can't measure, you can't manage. That's true. So that's where we are in the banking group, and since I'm talking about managing, right now the approach is monitoring. Simply know what you do and then decide later what you do about it if you're not happy. So right now it's not a management tool, it's a monitoring tool for us. It might become a management approach in the future if we feel that the data we generate is accurate enough.
Thank you very much.
Do I see?
Peter,
Do I
yes,
follow?
Edgardo, if you could tell us what
yeah, of course.
Latin
Well,
DFIs are doing, would be great.
No, it's quite interesting. Really, as I mentioned, if you don't know what you're doing, is the other people that they don't know what you do. And what we're doing in our region, I told you, there are some countries like Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Panama, Paraguay, and Peru that are issuing reports and with this kind of international applicable methodology. So it's good because they are not only involving the ESG, they involve all the ESG metrics in order that everybody knows what they're doing and all the impact they have. I know it's quite difficult. Could you imagine in the future that you go to the banks or to the regulator to tell you, okay, you have this in your capital, and you have these problems with the carbon, you have finance, and you must take a provision on that, or take a part of your capital for this. So I don't see it's going to happen in the future, but we must be working on that in that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edgardo. It's put on time as well. Hervé, if you could
Okay, yeah, I
also...
think we are catching up on
yes,
time,
I think
right?
we're doing
That's good.
quite well. I'm
Perfectly. Okay, so again, 2 minutes and a bit of probably also a historical approach about the role and place of basically looking at financed emission. Yeah, so AFD in actual fact has been looking closely at carbon footprint of its projects for a long time. We've been equipping ourselves with a footprinting tool like 10 years ago. And of course, I think the lessons we can draw from this is that, yes, looking at this is very useful at project level. You may want to make sure projects avoid emissions. On the other end of the spectrum, you may want to discard very emissive projects, irrespective of the context. Can you hear me? And also, they're pretty useful to compare to some benchmarks in terms of CO2 emissions intensities, for example, or other references. This said, I think I need to say that we find that there are important limitations when it comes to these exercises, especially if you look at aggregation exercises. But first of all, if you look even at a figure, a GHG figure doesn't say much per se. Basically, you have it doesn't say much about you know, how the project fits into a transition process. Then you have the aggregation issues. First of all, and I put that aside, we're not quite sure what we're adding when we're actually adding figures, because the way they're calculated, it's various projects, various sectors, sometimes various lifespans. But putting that aside, once you have an aggregated figure at portfolio level, it's very, very disconnected from of course, local context and national low carbon and low carbon pathway for that matter. So that's the main thing in actual fact. But I think in terms going back to a more general consideration on this, I think it's important to see also that altogether this finance emission approach stems, and I think Peter, you were referring to that. It refers to a sort of a direct impact approach to our activities. When, if you think of it, the essence of a more extensive path alignment approach is actually not to focus on direct impact. What you will be looking at is actually the validity of a type of a project in the context of a transition process. And a bit irrespective, it's not, at least it's not the primary thing you're going to look at, irrespective of the direct impact of the project itself, which is in most cases, as I said, not really significant in terms of what the number says, or in terms of the volume of GHG that is associated to it. So in a nutshell, and I will stop there, I think the real difference is almost like a consideration to an institution's emission, basically, VS versus the country's emission. I think it's exactly what both of you were saying. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah. So,
Karel, if you would like to maybe add to that or share some additional considerations.
Sorry. Yeah, let me respond to Peter and Hervé then. First, Peter, you said, what should we do? Well, for us, what we should do was basically given by the TCFD report, and we basically have been publishing since 1 year now our TCFD report, and that determines very much what should you report. It's also basically now being given by the European Sustainability Reporting Directive, and also our clients are getting struggling with that. But coming back to the place for financed emissions and reporting on that, of course, if your scientific mind, that is the Rolls Royce, or you can say that the Tesla maybe of the reporting. Coming back to you, Hervé, on the validity. Yeah, there are indeed some problems with finance emissions, and one of the biggest problems is that it may it may lead to, I would say, unwanted incentives that you stay away from the high emitting sectors, because your emissions will increase if you're going to tackle the difficult sectors. And the second thing is that you really have to look at the context. And give one example, we are also into the financing of poor region to improve tourism. Well, if the tourism indirectly leads to, I would say, more air traffic, you're basically doing, I would say, something that is not so good for the climate, but is not being captured in, normally is not being captured in your finance emissions story. And therefore, in our view, it's better to get one step down in your making it operationalizing, and that is looking for much more to sector emission intensity targets, and we're specifically working on that now in the area of the housing sector, and I'm very happy to share more information about that later.
Thank you, Karel. I'm sure we'll all like to take a look or learn more on what you're doing on that specifically. Afterwards, I'm going to pass it over to Mariam for the same question to you, please, from a National Development Bank perspective.
Okay, so I would say for us it's an interesting tool as it gives both information. Actually, it informs you on the global portfolio, so it's a tool if you want to get to the alignment. So you need to know where you are so that you can put objectives and go towards your objective. And at the same time, it informs you also on for the risk management. And at the bank level, I think it's very important also to, as we are in this process, to inform people and to inform our risk managers that there is a risk transition behind this portfolio when it finances a lot of carbon emissions. So this is something that we're still working on. For us, the road, I think, it might be longer than the ones that you are describing, because we are still in that capacity building process and informing about what it means to have a high emission portfolio.
Thank you very much, Mariam, and thank you to you all for responding to that question. I think we've pinpointed some of the probably more sticky topics related to the discussion on Paris alignment. I think I'm going to ask you one last question, and it's going to have to be, I'm sorry, concluding remarks from you all as well. We've asked you if you could reflect a little bit on the role of climate finance in accelerating the transition. If I'm going to start, we'll take it in the same order as we just did. So Dimitri, please, if you could give us your views on that, please.
Sure. Well, I started, the answer to your. I started. Can you hear me? I started the answer to your first question, by saying that we need to, at the end of the day, we need to bridge the global climate investment gap, and the public finance alone cannot do that. So my response to your question is mobilization, private sector mobilization as much as possible. And the resources, I mean, some of you probably saw the high-level expert group report, which was unveiled a couple of days ago, and it was basically about tapping into the domestic capital markets. That's very important because many developing countries, they cannot borrow into the hard currency, for all sorts of reasons, the exchange rate risks, the capital markets risks. So we are helping our country's operation to develop the domestic capital markets as much as possible, to basically mainstream the local currency financing. And then, the integrated approaches, to the green transition, which allow us, the EBRD in this case, to act as the catalyzer, to crowd in the private investment and spending. That's why the country sector platform approach that we're trying to roll out, that we're implementing already in Egypt. I spoke about 10 gigawatts, which are made possible by a small contribution on the side of donors and development partners, with a close to 1 to 20 mobilization ratio is so important, and we're trying to roll out similar approach across our country's operation, and that takes a lot of courage, lots of political will, but also lots of technical analysis, and the upstream policy dialogue, which also, requires lots of emphasis on the donor partnerships, because, that should be funded on the grant basis. So the answer is mobilization, you know, and we should be catalyzing as much as possible of the private finance. Some areas, you know, they are less amenable to the private finance, you know, the grid upgrades, the policy dialogue, the reskilling of workers and just transition. But the bulk of it, especially the mitigation related aspects related to the development of the new capacity, you know, it should be on the base of the project finance transactions, you know, where we provide the minority equity or we now finance whatever, like 20% of the debt, and that sort of provides the seal of approval for the private sector to chip in.
Thank you, Dimitri. Peter, yes, please.
I think the important part of this question is transition. I mean, climate finance to me is equivalent first and foremost with project finance. So you do a project, you do the best project, you make it perfect. So every ESG criterion and everything is perfect, but it still might not be transition that you effect. But you're generating some energy or you're producing clean water. It's good, yeah, I mean, the project makes sense. But if we talk about contributing to transition, then we need to see that a project can never be transition on its own, but is in a context. And I think we as public development banks, we have the luxury that we can invest resources in analyzing the context in which we work with our partners in the partner countries. And we can assess whether social, political, environmental, cultural, technical, all these factors are prone to leading to a transition if I do my investment or contributing. So the question is, shall we measure transition finance contribution as a KPI and not climate finance? So I was just wondering that. And another KPI, since you're mentioning leverage multipliers, leveraging more money for a similar purpose could be an indicator for a transition process. So maybe that's another indicator we could use.
Thank you. I don't want to repeat all the things because I agree with you. And I think that we must think something because we evaluate the projects at the beginning. But we must continue with what's going on with the project because we finance projects for 5, 10, or 20 years of living. So we must know what's going on in the future of the projects also. So it's just to keep in mind. So this way we can get a thrive and a sustainable and inclusive future that we all dream of. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to be just repeating what Peter just said. 3 points. Yes, there's no question we need to be accelerating transition. A lot of countries have not started to even plan it, so yes, we need to focus on this. So what we're looking at and what we're looking for is trying in our position to have structural effects. But then, yes, the question is, if we talk about climate finance, is it designed for that at the moment? Well, not really, to be clear. It's actually still a positive list of carbon lean technologies. So what we need to do, in a nutshell, is how to discern, is that, yeah? How to isolate better what will be climate finance or just finance with transformational potential. And very much echoing what IDFC is trying to carry as a message.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy with that I hear. It's very much about what you said. It's putting in the billions, or it is shifting the trillions. And I think the role of MDBs and other public development banks should very much be much more focused on shifting the trillions. And what does that in practice mean? Basically, it means that we need to maximize basically the climate co-benefits of general development projects. So that is one thing, and it will also mean that we need to, if we have climate projects, that we also need to maximize other co-benefits as well, because it's about shifting the trillions. It's not pure about climate projects anymore. It's very much about development and having, I would say, the super mainstreaming the development in our work.
So, as local public development bank, our objective is really to take that climate finance which is available when it is available and try to channel it towards the final beneficiaries And here my message would be not to put too much criteria that are not feasible on the field. Sometimes what we're noticing is that multilateral development banks or international development banks put too much criteria and indicators that makes it difficult actually to find projects. And this is what happens most of the time. We know that climate finance is there, but it's difficult to access it. And this is, I think, not only for us as Morocco, but most of the African countries are facing the same thing. And I believe this is where technical assistance is very important. Have as much as technical assistance as possible, not only for the banks, but also for the final beneficiaries, so that they're able to implement the projects. And also to have concessional rates, of course, because when you have several intermediaries, then it means that the final client, customer, will pay a high cost. So this would be my message.
Thank you very much, Mariam, and thank you all for being so diligent with time. I think it's nice to see that we all share very similar views, and the last question, I think, definitely showed that. I just noted a few words, but so context, feasibility, support, transition, pathway, transformation. Thank you very much for letting us all pick your brains. I think we've got a lot of food for thought and a lot of material for us to discuss further and to try to contribute as we can to the discussion that's ongoing. Thank you very much to you all. I think you deserve a round of applause because it was very difficult to stick on time. We could have gone on for hours, I think. And I'm sure the discussion will continue backstage. Thank you very much.
Coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity. Releasing common strategic and operational publications.